Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Dog Whisperer. I'm Evan Grollman, first episode in over almost 2 months. And I have my first ever elected official on, former Alabama Governor Don Siegelman. Good to have you, Governor.
Oh, I'm glad to be here and glad to support your podcast. I
Oh,
want to
thank you.
compliment you for uh, your tenacity and your devotion to trying to get a message out to people. So this is how our democracy is supposed to work. You bring people together, talk about issues, and even though you may have a difference of opinion, it's a way to help educate people. And I remember the words of Thomas Jefferson, who said that people can be trusted with their own government when they are well informed, and that's what you're doing. And so I applaud that.
Thank you, Governor. It's really nice to have you on here because I've followed. When you were governor, you were voted out when I was in kindergarten, so I wasn't as politically aware back then. But I have, I'm a big political junkie now, and I found the journey that you've been on so fascinating, and I know that you wrote a book about it, which I'd love to speak about a little bit. But first, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you said voted out. Actually, the election was, I won the night of the election. CBS, NBC,
Right.
All declared me the winner. And then overnight, 6,000 of my votes simply disappeared. And there's a long story to that that we don't have to get into. But it was all linked to some Karl Rove political operatives. So.
Yes, I did read about that, and I agree. I probably used the wrong word. What I wanted to get into this, but first, really quickly, I find it fascinating because Alabama has had a long history of governors with very different opinions. So I want to know how we go from having a governor as forward-thinking as yourself to now Kay Ivey, who I believe signed that abortion ban into law that doesn't even include rape and incest as exceptions.
Well, I think the people of Alabama are basically populist, and people can be reasoned with on most issues. If you're talking about education, for example, I ran on a platform of providing every child with free early learning, pre-kindergarten, an opportunity for parents to drop their kids off at early learning centers that would be paid for by an education lottery. And that if they stayed in school and stayed out of trouble and graduated from high school, they would be guaranteed a college scholarship or either job training. And, those are the kind of issues that appeal to people across the board, regardless of their religious views or, if they're conservative on one issue, you can reach them a majority on something that touches their heart. And most people are concerned about their children's well-being. They want their kids to have a better chance at life than they've had, and they know it starts with education.
That's a very good point. I mentioned that the election was stolen back when I was in kindergarten. For those people who don't know how old I am, you were governor from 1993 to 1999 to 2003. So when you lost, well, you didn't lose, but when the election was stolen from you and those votes were changed, and I wanted to get into the 2002 election a little bit. It was a close race, the 2002 election, right? Your re-election campaign, right?
It was. It should not have been. In fact, we were headed to what I thought was a landslide re-election, and then 9/11 occurred. The stock market crashed. Being, of course, Bush invaded Iraq, and all of the the drama that came along with that. George W. Bush's ratings went from the mid 30s to the high 90s in Alabama, and so I was battling an incoming tide of Republican votes. But despite that, I had brought in 5 automobile plants: Honda, Mercedes, Toyota, Hyundai, and second Honda plant. We started building 1,000 new schools, $2 billion in road and bridge construction. I'd put over 100,000 new jobs out, and people were working, and things were moving along fairly well. So we were able to squeak out a narrow victory, but it was a race overnight in a South Alabama courthouse that was controlled by Republicans, and 6,000 of my votes simply disappeared. The credit was given to one of Karl Rove's deputy, who was in Alabama keeping an eye on the election, and another political operative associated with Jack Abramoff, a Karl Rove buddy, who held himself out as a ballot security expert. And anyway, the results shifted overnight, and I lost. So I swore that I would come back and fight another day and run for re-election in 2006, and that's when my prosecutorial problems began. There was sworn testimony before the House Judiciary Committee that Karl Rove had directed the Department of Justice to, quote, pursue Siegelman, and that the 2 U.S. attorneys in Alabama were going to prosecute me. So anyway, that a lot of stuff came to light through Republican whistleblowers, and it's pretty much been confirmed by Republicans that I was targeted for political reasons. And that's really the heart of my book. Is the story, the book, Stealing Our Democracy, which I conveniently put right behind me, is not about me. And honestly, I don't care whether anybody buys a copy or not, although I just finished the audio book. So
yes,
in my voice. So if you can tolerate my voice, you can hear me tell my side of the story. But the book is really about what steps we have to take to preserve and protect our democracy from the abuses of power, not just by presidents, but also by police and by prosecutors. And in this day and age of Texas Republicans trying to steamroll bills through the legislature to curtail the right to vote, and other Republican legislatures, Republican-controlled legislatures around the country doing the same thing, my book, or the heart of my book, talking about what we need to do to protect our democracy, is even more relevant.
I completely agree with you, and I think you mentioned this. I'm not sure you mentioned it here just now, but I believe that the county where the votes suddenly changed and switched, that was your opponent's home county, Bob Riley, correct?
It wasn't his home county, but it was a solid Republican county. Yeah, and I didn't need to win that county. I just needed to win it by enough votes to keep him from being elected. There was a statistical analysis done by an independent professor at a university, someone I'd never met, never spoke to, that concluded that there was electronic ballot stuffing.
Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't allow the Democrats to audit the supposed computer issues.
Yeah, no, they Karl Rove's client, the state attorney general, seized the ballots and all the paraphernalia that go with voting, the cassettes and the computer, and refused to allow us to have a simple hand recount of the ballots, which would have told us who won.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think? Why do you think they chose this particular county to mess around with the ballots, and why specifically this county?
Well, I think because one, it was and still is a solid Republican controlled county. And when all of the election officials are of the same party, they get to appoint all of the election officials for all of the precincts and voting boxes. And so it makes it easier to do something in a stealth manner. Although in this case, what we believe happened and what this professor alleges happened is that the computer was actually hacked, and the 6,000 votes were simply taken from me. The obvious telltale sign was that 6,000 of my votes disappeared, but it didn't impact a single down ballot race. It didn't, no votes for anybody else was impacted by the 6,000 votes that were subtracted from my total. So it's just not logical, and it doesn't make any sense.
Well, obviously, it's not the same thing because I do believe you won re-election. But the former president Donald Trump has claimed that this 2020 election was a stolen election. Yet the down ballot races were never contested, even if the Republicans had won down ballot while President Biden won on top of the ballot. The difference is you knew you won, and you knew that you actually won. I'm sure Trump has a feeling that he did lose, but he was trying to keep his base going. And you chose to walk away 10 days after and concede the race to Bob Riley. What made you do that? What made you concede the race even though you had it?
Well, because it was the only, we were in a catch-22. There was under Alabama election law, you cannot contest an election unless you can show that there were enough illegal votes cast to make a difference or enough legal votes not counted to make a difference. But in this case, the Attorney General, Karl Rove-Klein's, had seized all of the materials and wouldn't let us count the ballots. So we couldn't conduct an elections contest. I walked away because it would have just made Alabama look bad, and it would have further undermined people's confidence in our elections process. And rather than putting the state of Alabama through that ordeal, I thought, I'm not going to win this thing anyway. So let me fold up my tent and come back 4 years later and win this race and be done with it. And that's what I set out to do and was about to do when charges were brought.
And they were first brought in 2004 and quickly dismissed after about 6 months, correct?
Oh, actually about 6 hours. The judge, it was less than 1 day. And the judge said it was the most unfounded criminal case over which he had presided in his 29 years and 7 months on the bench. This was again concocted by people who were directly linked to Karl Rove. It was after that I announced that I was running for re-election in 2006, and then I was brought to trial 1 month before my re-election by the wife of my opponent's campaign manager. Mm-hmm. So my opponent, Bob Riley's campaign manager's wife, was the U.S. attorney. The U.S. attorney's husband was running by my opponent's campaign, and she brought me to trial 1 month before the election.
So was her call so was her call then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. I want, before we get into the trial, I just want to talk a little bit about being governor of Alabama, because if I didn't mention it, you are the last Democrat to have served in that position. How easy was it to communicate your message to the voters? Because from what I've read, you're a pretty progressive individual, and Alabama, as you said, is a populist state. So how did you convey that populist message?
Well, my opponent was a Republican incumbent. He was the sitting governor, Republican, and he had when he was governor before, he had proposed a constitutional amendment to have a Christian prayer put into the state constitution. He supported the Confederate battle flags being put out at Alabama welcome stations. And I think because of my position on education and my determination to turn the state around in terms of how other people outside of the state viewed Alabama, the business community began to take a second look at me. Even though I was a liberal or progressive Democrat, they heard what I was saying about free college education and early learning. It made sense to them in terms of who they would want sitting across the table from a CEO making a pitch for a company to move to Alabama to create jobs here. I was a far better choice. So I was able to pick up some Republican support along the way, which both added to my campaign coffers and also to the ultimate vote. So, it was a struggle, but in the end, I won by some 56%. So it was, I won by a handy margin.
Yeah. And that was against Bob James, correct?
Correct.
And it was in 1998. So when you were governor, what made you come up with you proposed a lottery for free college education. What made you come up with that idea? Because, on the federal level, we weren't really talking about free college until maybe 2016 or 2015 when Bernie Sanders came onto the trail. What gave you that idea to do it on a state level back in the 90s and 2000s?
Well, actually, it was in 1989. I proposed that the idea. I floated the idea in a race. Actually, I made a race for governor for the Democratic nomination in 1990. Lost the nomination, but part of my platform was to provide free college education by a statewide lottery, education lottery, and increasing property taxes for out-of-state timber companies that we were still then and now still only charging just like 35 cents per acre. So it's and all of that money would go to schools, and it just, they have an unfair advantage here, the timber companies. And anyway, it just seemed to make sense. And then after losing in 1990, I decided, forget the tax. Let's talk about the lottery, because people either, one, would support it because they wanted their kids to have a better education, or two, they just simply wanted to play the lottery. Georgia had a lottery at that time, and Zell Miller had been elected on that platform and had instituted a Hope College scholarship in Georgia that was very successful.
So did Georgia send their kids to college for free? Or
yes, yeah, they were at that time in 1998, I think about 8 years into their lottery experiment, and it was proving to be very successful. And a lot of people from Alabama would be seen at the Alabama-Georgia border buying lottery tickets, and so it was clear to me that Alabamians supported a lottery because they wanted to win. And I thought by tying it to free college education that would be a win-win for the kids and to get votes.
What obstacles did you face as governor? But also, I know you faced obstacles with this lottery, especially from some of the casinos in Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Jack Abramoff, who was one of Karl Rove's college young Republican buddies, represented the Mississippi Choctaw Indians, and he actually admitted in both his book and And in a documentary that was done about my case called Atticus versus the Architect, he admits that they spent $20 million of Indian casino money. They laundered illegally $20 million of Indian casino money into Alabama to influence our election. And so they impacted the referendum on the lottery by encouraging preachers to encourage their members to vote against the lottery.
Now, when was that referendum put on the? When was it on the ballot? What year?
It was I pushed it ahead in a special election on October the 12th, 1999.
Okay.
So I wanted it done quickly so that we could begin raising money so we could, be sending kids to college, immediately.
If you had to do it all over again, would you have picked a different year to do the referendum?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was a mistake. I should have waited until the next general election, and the $20 million can influence a lot of people in a small election when there's a small turnout. But in a general election where everybody's voting, then they would have had a harder time to manipulate the electorate.
So 1999 wasn't the. So you think 2000 would have been a better time to do that?
Absolutely, yeah. 2000 or even 2002.
That's interesting. Why do you think? Why do you think? Just because I'm not from Alabama, why do you think 2000 would have been a better year than 1999?
Well, we would have had more people voting.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of, I don't remember what the vote was in the election. I ought to know, but I don't. But it's a good question, something to look up. But it was minuscule compared to the next general election, where there would have been, probably 1.5 million or 1.7 million, 1,700,000 people voting.
What do you know the referendum? What was the percentage vote for the lottery? Do you know how much people what percentage of people approved of it?
No, I don't really recall, but I think it was substantial. It was a substantial defeat.
Oh.
And what was so peculiar of it is that the political surveys going into the election showed that it was supported by 65 to 72% of the people. So there was no reason for anybody to think that anything that it wouldn't pass. We all assumed that because one, I was elected by such a substantial majority over a Republican opponent, and I was running on a platform of the lottery. We all assumed that if you just singled out the lottery for education, that it would pass by the full 65% or maybe even higher.
How did the preachers encourage their congregants to vote against the referendum?
Well, it was done according to Jack Abramoff and Ralph Reed, it was done in two ways. They actually paid churches to preach against the lottery and talk about the evils of gambling, and that it would lead to prostitution and to people, alcoholism and drug abuse and crime, and it was evil and they should vote against it. And then with Black or African American preachers who were also paid, they were told to stay home, don't vote. This is again the same message, but they didn't want Blacks to turn out because they knew that Blacks were more than likely going to vote for the lottery if they did turn out. But they wanted the white voters, the white Christians, to turn out. And these people were so hypocritical that they, here's Ralph Reed, who is president of the Christian Coalition, taking $4 million of Indian casino money to pay off preachers to tell people not to vote for a lottery that would benefit their children. I mean, it was really, I can forgive them for what they did to me, but I really can never forgive them for what the damage that they have done to the children of Alabama, because we still don't have universal pre-K or early learning. We don't have, of course, free college education or any kind of universal job training.
Would the lottery have also paid for free preschool?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Free preschool, and also we would have had distant learning through technology and putting computers in every classroom, and so it would have made a huge difference in Alabama's education, and conversely, it would have had a huge impact on diminishing people's dependency on government subsidies, and it just goes on and on and on. So
yes,
terrible tragedy for the kids.
When I was in Alabama, I saw, it depending on where you went. I was in a town called Cherokee. And that town looked like it was abandoned for the most part. It didn't seem like I didn't see a lot of people there. What was the difference in terms of how you would campaign in a big city like Birmingham versus a small town like Cherokee or anywhere in the state of Alabama? How would you campaign differently from the metropolitan areas versus the rural areas?
That's a very good question, particularly for people who may be considering running for office. The very first thing a candidate should do is start calling people in every part, every community. I mean, you may want to start in the large cities and work your way down, but you've got to have people who are committed to you and being a coordinator for you in every city and town and crossroads, no matter how big or small. And so in the smaller areas, in the rural areas, they expect you, and you have to be there. You have to go through there. You have to see them. You have to let them know you're coming, either by mail or email now, or but you have to have some opportunity in every community for people to actually see you and meet you and shake your hand. In the larger communities, people don't necessarily expect to meet you, but you still have to go through that. And in addition, of course, you have now social media and radio and television, to reach people, masses of people in larger communities. But I won primarily because I did a lot of groundwork, going to organizing before I announced, getting commitments from people to help me before I announced I was running, and visiting those city halls and county courthouses in every place in the state.
I noticed that even in the election that was stolen from you in 2002, you actually won a lot of the counties that went to Roy Moore in 2017 during that special election, very rural counties, including the one that I was in when I was visiting your state a few years ago. What do you think has changed since 2002 in terms of your state's political demographics?
I think, largely, of course, and it's easy to point to the Trump phenomena, and we had the support for Donald Trump in conservative states, and not only conservative states, in every state. I think every state he showed that he had a strong base of support, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it was based on white supremacy or racism, or this idea that somehow or another white people are better than others. And I think that appeal that our country is being overtaken by immigrants and blacks and Mexicans and Muslims and scared people into a state where they were willing to take up arms against the United States government on January the 6th. I think, Congress, the Republicans in the Senate, when they failed to do their duty and to convict Trump for crimes against our democracy, it not only opened the door to a re-election campaign in 2024, but it opened the door to the insurrection on January the 6th. And it opened the door to barriers and barricades which are being presented to Biden's agenda, his progressive agenda. It's opened the door to Republican legislatures who are bent on now restricting the right to vote so that they can control the outcome of elections ostensibly legally by restricting who can vote in this country. We've had a history of doing this. It's just become, it's more sophisticated. I mean, before it was simply, Native Americans and blacks and women weren't given the right to vote. After the Civil War, after slaves were freed, we had the onslaught of Jim Crow constitutions, which prohibited blacks from voting, and then they came up with the poll tax and the literacy test, and then gerrymandering and photo IDs, and the games that people play with restricting the right to vote is endless. And now Republicans are taking it to a new limit. What baffles me, Evan, our democracy ought to be open to anyone who is qualified to vote. So what difference does it make how a person votes, whether they vote by mail or vote in person, whether they put their ballot in a drop box or take it down to the courthouse? As long as people are only voting once and they're a qualified voter, it shouldn't matter how they vote.
I agree with you 100%, Governor. I noticed that in 2020, some of my Republican friends were very ambivalent or even terrified of the idea of vote by mail. They were making it very partisan by saying it's going to benefit the Democrats, and the only reason I can see that it would benefit Democrats is it would create higher voter turnout, which often does benefit Democrats because there are more Democrats than GOP voters. But we're both canceled out by the independent, unaffiliated voters who could go either way. But some people,
it's a matter in today's world. How many people buy things online?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go to a brick and mortar store anymore to buy a pair of socks. You don't even have to go there to buy a car,
right?
Or to get your driver's license renewed, or to get a license plate. So why are Republicans so determined to have people? The only votes that count are people who come to stand in line and go vote in person. When I became Secretary of State, the only time you could vote was from 8 until 5 p.m. on Tuesday. Well, how many workers, how many laborers, how many blue collar workers have a holiday on Tuesday from 8 to 5? None of them. Mm-hmm. So, the whole scheme of restricting the hours and the method of voting is designed to produce an outcome. And that's why my book, Stealing Our Democracy, is so relevant in this discussion about what's going on in Texas and these other states today. It's this, stuffing ballot boxes or limiting how people vote, poll taxes, they all have something in common. They're all directed toward stealing our democracy.
Completely agree. And a lot of people, don't realize when I hear the talking point of it's easy to manipulate the vote by mail situation. In your case, it was manipulated on the computer, on the voting machines. So, computers aren't necessarily immune to these shady things either, based on what those votes getting switched to your opponents.
Yeah, that's why we asked for a recount in one precinct, in one voting precinct.
Mm-hmm.
So we could hand count the paper ballots and determine within a few hours who actually won the governor's race. But before we could count a single ballot, the Attorney General, who was Karl Rove's client, absconded with all of the ballots, so we couldn't have a recount. So that's why, when ballot security experts who are talking now about the ways to ensure an accurate and an election that can be audited, say that we have to vote by paper ballots, either mail-in ballots or hand ballots that are sent through a optical scan or some other method of voting, but not an electric, not through any means that where the vote cannot be hand counted.
Couple questions about the governorship. First of all, I've always wanted to ask you this. Do you think Alabama will ever have another Democratic governor?
Yes, I do. I think it'll take a little while, and it's going to take someone who's willing to spend, a good deal of their life working toward that goal. Mm-hmm. The problem that I've seen in Alabama is that we have some really good people who would make good governors and good Democratic governors or good Republican governors, but they're not willing to put in the time to, one, start volunteering to work on somebody's campaign, to learn how to get elected, and then to start the process of working to build up people's trust. And you mentioned in Cherokee, Alabama, or in rural communities, as I mentioned, you have to go there. People have to see you. They have to talk to you. They have to know you. And if they know and trust you, they don't really care whether you're a Democrat or Republican, because they know you and they trust you.
That's a good point. So the issue is to get away from the partisanship and just connect, basically, is what you're saying.
If you are a Democrat running in a red state or a Republican running in a blue area, that you just it's got to be a personal relationship. You've got to take the time to meet people, and they've got to know you and know your heart and know and believe in you and trust you. And that's I know we're getting short on time, and I'd like to take a few minutes to close, because you've touched on something that we started out talking about Thomas Jefferson and his belief that the people could be trusted with their own government if they're well informed. And Dwight Eisenhower said that politics is like war. It's too important to be left just to the professionals. That if the people who have the right to vote, if you participate in it, if we all become soldiers in that sense, as voters, then we can impact the outcome of elections. So, I would encourage people to find candidates in whom they believe and trust, and work for them, help them get elected, and or run for office themselves, but to hold true to the promises that they made when they were running for office. And that is what is so critical about where Joe Biden is right now. He has got to produce for the people who sent him to Washington this time. If he does not produce, whether he has to, modify the filibuster, or he's going to, or pull in Republicans to supplant his, to build his base, but he has got to get enough votes to pass H.R. 1 or some version of it, and he's got to get enough votes to to do things to protect our environment. So with that, let me close by saying that, in fact, I'd like to quote one of my favorite presidents who wasn't a Democrat, but Teddy Roosevelt, who was the founder of the Bull Moose Party, the Progressive Parties. And he said that the credit belongs to those who are in the arena, whose faces are marred by dust and sweat and blood, who know the great enthusiasms, who spend themselves in a worthy cause. And then if they should fail while daring greatly, at least know that their place will not be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. So, I believe that if we work long enough and hard enough, we can change things, that things can get better, that we can make this, our state, our country, and this world everything that we know it can and should be.
Some wise words. If I may ask you real quickly, I don't know how much time you have left. You mentioned President Biden. What do you think, because the title of your book is Stealing Our Democracy, what threat do you think President Trump poses, or did pose, or continues to pose to our country and our democracy?
Well, it's not so much Donald Trump anymore. It is his supporters who are afraid to break with him because they know that there is a Trump base in their home state or in their home political subdivision. I think the greatest threat to our democracy now is the failure of a Biden administration. If I believe that he is doing the right things, I think he is saying the right things, but you've got to accomplish the right things, and that's going to require getting things through the United States Congress, and that means he has got to bring in the Democrats, and he's going to have to pull in a few Republicans, and it shouldn't be that difficult to do. So we're all waiting and hoping and believing that that this administration will be the one who answers questions about equal justice, social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, and criminal justice reform. And if he can answer those calls, then I think we will see our democracy flourish.
What do you think President Biden's number one priority should be right now?
I think passing H.R. 1, I think to preserve people's right to vote. And I think, right behind that, I think is, protecting our planet from this climate crisis that we're facing.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to touch on it very briefly. What was the trial like that you faced in 2006?
Well, I started out thinking that it was going to be a fair trial, but it wasn't. It wasn't long before. In fact, it was before the trial started. We made an attempt to offer evidence that the prosecutor's husband was running my opponent's campaign, and the judge said, we're not going to have any discussion of politics in this courtroom. So, we knew that this was not going to be a fair fight. So, with our hands tied, we couldn't show the political connections between the prosecution and my political opponent.
Based on what I read in your book, it sounds like the judge was really that not only was the state trying to make something stick, but the judge was out to get you too, because he was basically holding the jury hostage and sequestered them and would not accept the hung jury verdict.
Yeah, the judge and I had political battles dating back to 1994. He actually, it was on the Republican Executive Committee that voted to oppose the education lottery in 1999. And so, we had a number of serious political infights, and he really should never have been my judge, should have disqualified himself, refused to disqualify himself when he was called on to do so. But that's all behind me now, and I'm focused on my primary mission is criminal justice reform and trying to make a difference for those people who have suffered injustice at the hands of prosecutors.
Well, since you're doing criminal justice reform, or you're hoping for criminal justice reform, what is the biggest aspect of criminal justice reform that we should implement? Because you had to deal with it yourself.
I think one thing that and I've passed this on to the Biden administration. I think that while reducing or limiting qualified immunity for police officers and eliminating immunity for prosecutors, it should be high on his agenda. The way to ensure a measure of justice for families of Blacks who are victims of excessive use of force by police is to allow those families to have a lawyer present in a grand jury. Prosecutors get 99% of the indictments they want, but when it comes to indicting a police officer for killing a Black, the percentage drops precipitously. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that police and prosecutors and judges generally all view themselves as playing on the same team. They all wear the same color jersey. On the back it says, property of the government. They protect each other. Prosecutors are immune from civil liability. They can present false evidence, false testimony, withhold exculpatory evidence with impunity, because the Supreme Court has given them blanket immunity from civil prosecution. And Congress has also given them immunity. But so prosecutors, when they want to indict somebody, they can. And when they don't want to indict somebody, they don't have to, because they don't, in the secrecy of a grand jury, they can withhold evidence or present false evidence to allow someone who's guilty of the use of excessive force to walk free. In the Breonna Taylor case, the officers who were involved in her death were not charged. And if you look at Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, I can't help but believe that if Benjamin Crump had been in the grand jury, that the outcome would have been different. But I've got to go. It's good talking to you,
Thank
Evan.
you, Governor Siegelman.
Congratulations on your podcast. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you for being our first political guest. And everyone, be sure to buy his book, Stealing Our Democracy. I ordered mine on Kindle, so you can read it on your iPhone too. And the audiobook too.
And I would advise, don't buy the book. Listen to the audio book if you get a chance. And if you don't want to do either, if you're a member of Amazon, if you're a Prime, you can look at there's a documentary on my case called Atticus versus the Architect, and it's free on Amazon.
Thank you very much, Governor, for being here, and I wish you luck in what you plan on doing in the future with the criminal justice reform efforts and everything else.
I wish you luck as well, Evan.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.